Good evening and welcome to the Job Search Solution, the radio program where we talk about looking for a job, changing jobs, changing careers, hiring. And as always, we begin with a prayer. Dear God, grant us thy peace and thy mercy, thy will be done. Last week, we were talking about some of the ways to deal with the emotional challenges of looking for a job. And the more people out there that are looking for a job, the more the emotional strain is on everybody. I wanted to remind you that next to death of a spouse, death of a child, death of a parent, coupled with divorce, the fourth most emotional thing we do is look for a job. And there are ways of dealing with it. We're never going to totally do away with the emotional strain of finding a job, but there are ways of offsetting the challenges of the emotional strain. Remember, life isn't fair, and you might as well get over it. The sooner you get over the fact that life isn't fair, that looking for a job isn't fair, that interviewing and trying to get hired isn't fair, the better off you are. It's just not fair. You want to remember, too, that there are only certain things you can control. We have a tendency to ruminate and get upset and get emotionally distressed about things we can't control. I'll get into it in a second, but there are just some things you can control and there's some things you can't. I had a client that interviewed 4 of my candidates over the last 3 weeks, narrowed it down to 2, told both of them that he was going to hire one of the other, and had them do 90-day plans, all kinds of things to go through the interviewing process. And he ended up hiring a guy that he had known for 10 years, a friend of his. Well, one of my candidates was terribly distraught over it, downright mad, downright angry about the fact that he was told, he thought that he was going to get hired, and then he didn't. He can't control that. I can't control that. You can only work on what you can control. And the things you can control are the number of people you contact, the number of phone calls that you make, the number of interviews that you get, how you perform on those interviews. Metaphorically, getting on the interview process from first base to second base to third base, and then hopefully coming home. You can only control certain things, and you've got to know what you can control and what you can't control. You can only control what you can do. You can't control what other people do. The fact that the fellow hired somebody that was a friend of his for 10 years, none of my candidates nor myself could control that. So you've got to remember what you can control and what you can't control and recognize that. Quit ruminating over what people do that you can't control. Set up a routine. Very important. Get up every day if you're out of work and looking for a job, every day at exactly the same time. Approaching a job search as though it was a job itself. Get dressed like you were going to work. Trying to look for a job in your bunny slippers and your pajamas, not a good idea. It's not professional. It doesn't come across that way. Mentally and emotionally, you're not prepared. So set up a routine. Get up every morning at the same time. Make calls every day at the same time. Try to get interviews at the same time every day. And develop a routine so that you fall into that routine and you function in that routine every day in exactly the same way. Remember that massive action overcomes fear. The best way to deal with fear and the emotional strain of looking for a job is to take massive, massive action. What do I mean by that? Getting talking to a lot of people, making lots of phone calls, trying to get in front of as many people as you possibly can to interview, and keep doing that and doing that and doing that. Lots of people start out that way, and then About 6 weeks into the thing, they start falling away from the routine because they're saying, this isn't getting me anywhere, especially in the conditions that we're in now in a pandemic where everybody is afraid. You've got to keep up that routine, and you've got to keep up the massive, massive action. I go over this in the job search solution of some of the things that you ought to be doing. And there are things that people just normally don't think of, like contacting old associates and contacting them a number of times, contacting their relatives and contacting them a number of times every 30 to 45 to 60 days. Keep on the massive action of trying to get interviews and doing well on those interviews. And then the last thing to remember for right now is you've got to practice interviewing. It does not come naturally. Lots of people think that, oh, well, they tell me, Tony, just get me in front of them. I'm real good at interviewing. That's not the case. In this market, an employer is interviewing 14 to 15 people for every person that they're hiring. You have to perform superbly in those interviews, which means you have to practice a whole lot. I mean, a whole lot. And you've got to practice to where you have it down to where you're selling features, advantages, and benefits, and you know exactly what you're selling to that employer. All right, we're going to take a short break. Stay tuned. This is Tony Bashara with the Job Search Solution.